Ferrari has unveiled the brand new SF-26 for 2026. As always, Ferrari delivers stunning renders that perfectly represent the actual car we've seen running on track. Let's dive into all the details because this is the initial configuration version. A. From Barcelona tests, Ferrari will bring updates to version A in the second and third Bahrain tests, and arriving at Melbourne there will be plenty of new features. So there's still much to discover, even though it already looks pretty aggressive. Ferrari did the shakedown at Fiorano, but at one point the car stopped. Immediately social media talked about a failure, but there were no problems. The stop was simply the 15-kilometer limit prescribed by regulations for demonstration events. Everything's fine. Stay with me because the technical analysis is genuinely interesting. Ferrari has revealed the new car for 2026, the SF-26. And as always, Ferrari does things properly, giving us images and renders that show exactly what the real machine looks like. Let's examine this car in detail. During the shakedown, things went smoothly for Ferrari. The car stopped at one point, and social media raised alarms about a failure, but there were no real problems. It was simply the 15-kilometer regulatory limit for demonstration events. So, everything's good for Ferrari. While Ferrari ran smoothly, a Ferrari customer-powered car had some difficulties getting started. They took quite a bit of time to fire it up, then ran it very briefly before bringing it straight back to the pits. But this is completely normal at this stage with brand new machines. These cars are absolutely brand new. We're right at the beginning of 2026. I guarantee you that in Barcelona there will be tons of problems we probably won't even see. Maybe some photos, but hardly any videos. But that's precisely why they do testing. That's exactly why private tests exist. Leaving engines aside, let's examine the aerodynamics. It's a rather conservative machine compared to Mercedes, but with some interesting detailed characteristics. Let's go through them from front to back. I'll use both renders and real photos for analysis because Ferrari always makes them identical to reality. You have to acknowledge it, Ferrari has always been excellent at this. For comparison, I'll use the Mercedes W17 render, even though it's slightly different from the real car. The nose is definitely the component that stands out most. It's very different between Ferrari and Mercedes. Mercedes took a much more conservative approach regarding the front wing layout. Both cars have the actuator positioned under the nose. On Ferrari, you can clearly see a different approach. The third element of the wing goes more inward on the nose, opening up a passage for air in the center. I'll also discuss a different solution Ferrari adopted on the car's floor shortly, which diverts air in two different directions. Looking at the footplate, you can see Ferrari made a sort of ribbing on the tip, near the front tire, to help channel airflow around the front tire. The end plates are also curved in a way that guides air around the front tire as well. These are elements that create outwash, meaning they push air outward. They don't have that small winglet we've seen on some other cars, and both on the real W17 and the real SF-26, the upper fin on the footplate is missing. It's simply a different approach. Some teams keep it and others don't. In another image, you can see the suspension system. It's a multi-link suspension, and it's push rod, both front and rear. This isn't a surprise, we've known this for about a month and a half now. I've already discussed the fact that this car has push rod front and rear. Similar to Red Bull, it's becoming quite common now among the teams. And there's also quite a bit of anti-dive geometry, very similar to what Mercedes implemented. Mercedes is the car I'll continue using for comparison throughout this analysis. Looking at the air intakes highlighted on the W17, they're very similar to Ferrari's approach. They're quite similar to each other, except Ferrari has a more P-shaped intake. It still has that slightly sucked-in characteristic. The approach is essentially the same as the W17. Here's a photo of the real cars side by side, the W17 and SF-26. You can see some similarities, but also important differences looking at them from the side. The Sidepod approach is similar in that both have a fairly marked undercut. I'd say Mercedes has a more pronounced undercut compared to the SF-26, but both go very outward trying to push air laterally around the rear tires, creating that outwash effect they're seeking. The engine cover has a sort of hump compared to the W17, which is much smoother and thinner in that area. The airbox is very large on the W17, while the SF26 has a tiny airbox, and maintains that V-shape Ferrari has used for ages. You can also see a small aerodynamic element right under the mirrors compared to what Mercedes did. Here's an even better photo showing the real Sidepod comparison. The W17 is a bit blurry, but you can see the actual Sidepods compared. This is what I meant about a more conservative approach from Ferrari compared to the W17. Quite elegant and slim, but with downwash and bulky seen from the side to create that outwash effect. During winter, there was much talk about bulky sidepods on Ferrari, and this seems to be true. There are some elements on the floor design trying to regulate airflow toward the car's rear. It's become quite aggressive compared to other teams from what we've seen. But the general sidepod approach is still conservative for now. I decided to compare both renders to discuss that interesting lower area visible on these completely new flat floors. Mercedes and Ferrari look decidedly different seen from the side. That element we're calling the wakeboard, which used to be the barge board. Mercedes removed the first long vertical piece while Ferrari kept it. The rear part instead is quite similar on both cars. The splitter underneath has some similarity to the T-tray we saw in cars from 2022 to 2025. It divides air in two different directions, keeping it fairly uniform on the floor. But then there's a rather large slot right behind. From here, you can see the serrated shark fin of the engine cover. They still maintain that tendency from 2017 style cars, but you see some definition on that hump, while Mercedes did everything very differently. There aren't many details on Ferrari's halo compared to the W17. Looking from above, you can see how much slimmer the W17 is compared to the SF26. I think this is also why there's a different airbox approach, and it's much smaller on Ferrari compared to Mercedes. The humps have returned on the car, shooting airflow between the rear wing and diffuser. And even though these are downwash side pods, I wouldn't call them remotely extreme like those we saw in the previous regulations. Looking at the rear wings, they're quite similar in approach. We'll need to see many other different rear wings to understand downforce levels and what they're seeking. Both these wings seem to have very little load. They're very thin. Both have double support. Maybe Ferrari has it slightly wider, and there's an actuator up top that opens the rear wing together with the front wing, giving that active aerodynamic mode we'll see extensively on straights. There will be tons to see in Barcelona and subsequent tests. This is just the beginning of understanding the SF26's philosophy and how it will evolve through the season.